Kia ora and hello, friends. Matthew Dawson here. Welcome back to the Restoring Connections podcast, diving into how we build strength, resilience, and how we heal our most important relationships, those relationships that you want to last a lifetime. Talking about personal responsibility, proactive care, powerful communication, and healthy boundaries. Those are our four pillars that we come back to. Those are the things that we have learned build strength and resilience into an important relationship, so that when you go through the difficult times, you're going to be able to get through it. You're going to be able to, you might sustain some injuries, some disconnection for a bit, but ultimately it's going to build the relationship. It's going to build trust, and you'll be stronger on the other side. These are the things that we have discovered definitely help and are, as far as I can tell, completely necessary for that to work in a close relationship. Okay, so let's dive in. This is part 2 of a 2-part series on the question, what do I do with all this pain? What do I do, right? I'm in pain, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, and this relationship needs me to be fun and happy and peaceful and lovely and kind, but I am in pain. Well, which one is it? Obviously, it's both. You know, because there's two people in the relationship and you both matter. That's what creates the tension. And that's what often happens in a relationship, is when things get tough, the question comes to the surface, which of us in this relationship matters? And maybe you are used to going into doormat mode, and that's your way of, and it seems maybe a little bit noble, and maybe it seems selfless, but to say, no, I don't matter. I don't have any needs. I'm completely fine. I just go into doormat mode, whatever. Or maybe you're more the type of person to go into T-Rex mode when things get tough. And it's like, meet my needs or I'm going to freak out, right? Obviously, neither of those extremes are healthy at all. So we've got to figure out, what do we do when we're in pain? What do we do with this pain? I don't want to just freeze you out. I don't want to T-Rex you, but I also don't want to pretend that I'm not in pain, right? I matter in this relationship. You matter in this relationship. Holy moly, we got two people in this relationship who matter. That's a tension. That's a problem. It's a lot easier to manage if just one of us matters. Just you matter, and then I don't matter. And then that's like painful, but at least it's manageable. Like, okay, we can figure that out. Or just only I matter and you don't matter. Unhealthy, but, manageable. We can kind of figure that out for a little while. Short term, of course, not going to work long term. But this, like, you matter and I matter, like, you need love and I need love. You need respect and I need respect. Whoa, Houston, we have a problem. This is going to be challenging. There you go. And that's what makes it really challenging. So in the first part of this, we've named this, what do I do with all this pain? A wholehearted approach. And we talked about this a little bit in the last episode in part 1, that when you go through something painful, there's always this pull, and it'll look different, for every person, but there's this pull to disintegrate yourself in order to manage, I'm coming from the perspective of what I guess you could call a Judeo-Christian narrative around creation, around the purpose of life. And so the way I interpret these kind of realities on life is that when I'm experiencing, disconnection, when I'm experiencing like relational pain, the way I look at that is I'm experiencing something that ultimately was not God's design for me to experience. This was not God's intention. This doesn't reflect the Garden of Eden, if you like, And so I'm I've got to figure out what to do about that. Something has disrupted what you could call my natural state, or my intended state, and so we've got to figure out what to do with that. And we can develop some really unhealthy patterns for dealing with that reality, right? And that's where we develop, addictions, and we develop really unhealthy communication patterns. We develop stuff quite often. It's completely subconscious. It's stuff that we started, tools that we picked up from our family dynamics, tools we picked up from our parents when we were little kids. Like, this is just how you do it. you know when you're mad, you just freeze everybody out and pretend like it never happened, because that's how we did it in my family. Or when you're mad, you just get yourself completely stoned and use that and it works probably, for a, for a little bit. That's not my particular, that's not my thing. But man, I've journeyed with enough people who that is their thing. I get how that works. It's like, it works momentarily to deal with the agony of the disconnection, you know. Or maybe it's like, well, we just bite each other's heads off. We just rant and rage at each other. And why do you do that? I don't know. It's just how we've always done it. So we're taking a fresh look at, how's that working out for you? As our dear friend Danny Silk likes to ask. Love that question. How's that working out for you? Not so good. Not so good. Thanks for asking. It's like, okay, well, you got to, if I'm going to exchange that tool, you got to give me something else. And so that's what we're unpacking here. I'm trying to give you a different set of tools for how you deal with your pain. And there are probably some dynamics to the way that you deal with pain that are already really healthy. There's probably some things that you learned from your family that are really healthy. Maybe you learned the discipline of not just shooting off at the mouth. And I would say, good, that's good. Don't lose that. Keep that. But then it drifts into total passivity and you never speak the truth. And you just sort of quietly distance yourself and build up bitterness towards people. Well, maybe that's not quite so healthy. Keep the healthy part, but let's try to add some courage to speak the truth to that, right? So we're having a fresh look at all that. Part one was stop the bleeding, right? When you're going through something really painful, first things first, don't even try to sort of build the connection. If you are what we call going below the line in terms of your emotional and mental state, you are going to act like someone who is below the line. You're going to act like someone who's under threat, and there's nothing to be ashamed of in that. That is a part of life, right? I'm sure you are a wonderful person. You're listening to this. I'm sure you are a wonderful, loving person, right? Sometimes you are going to go below the line emotionally and mentally. And even though you are a wonderful, loving, kind person, you're going to behave like someone who is under threat. You're going to behave like someone who's trying to protect themselves. So we got to stop the bleeding. We got to actually focus first and foremost. I'm using that metaphor, stop the bleeding, like a person that's being wheeled into an operating theater fresh off of a car crash. I always say you probably heard me say this before. It's not time for essential oils and physiotherapy. It's time for like we gotta, I don't know, amputate this leg, or we gotta sew this thing up, or this person's arm is needing to be put back, or whatever it is. You got it. First things first. You just got to get back to a place of peacefulness. No, I wouldn't even attempt to try to rebuild trust. When you are feeling really disrespected, you're feeling really pained, right? You're not in a state to be able to rebuild trust. You're going to act like someone who is under threat. You're not going to be able to protect the connection. You're going to be trying to protect yourself, because that's what people do when we're under threat. It's quite a natural response, actually. So you just got to, so we talked about accept that I'm below the line. Number one. Number two, identify who's in the blast radius or the freeze out zone, who's likely to be impacted by what I'm going through. Number three, determine my needs. And what is it going to take for me to get back to a healthy state? And number four, communicate where necessary. if that's going to impact people, if what I'm going through is going to impact people that are counting on me, that are relying on me, I need to communicate where necessary. Okay? So now the bleeding has stopped. We've done a great job with all that. Now the other work begins of actually getting the healing, right? And this is where, we've got to be careful. We don't just stop the bleeding, because then what's going to happen? You're just postponing. You're probably going to go through, if you don't learn anything, if you don't heal through the process, guess what? You're probably going to go through the same thing again next week or next Thanksgiving when your family's back around and you think, okay, everybody's gone. Thanksgiving's over. Don't have to deal with my family anymore, and I'm traumatized. Well, buckle up. If you don't learn anything, if you don't get some healing in that, you don't grow through that. If there's no trust restored or built, you're very likely to just go through the same thing over again next year, right? I don't know about you, but I hate that feeling so much. I went through that recently where I went through something in a very close relationship, and I thought to myself, we've already been around this block. We've already made this mistake with each other before. We know better. And it was so aggravating. Oh my goodness, that's the worst. So we want to avoid that, right? So a wholehearted approach. We got to resist that force that's trying to pull you into unhealthy disintegration, right? Where you kind of, whatever that might look like for you, maybe it's a particular, maybe behind the scenes, you run to an addiction, that you disintegrate your reality. You show part of yourself to this group and a part of yourself to that. Gossip, right, is a really good example of a disintegrating that takes place, right? So where you go through something in a relationship, right? And what is required, what's needed, is an exchange of truth in love. But instead of doing that, you disintegrate. You go and you vent and process and vomit. Sorry to be graphic, but I think it's merited. All of your pain and frustration over in this other relationship. So you're pulling these things apart. There's a disintegration that's taking place, right? So we're resisting that urge, and we're lining up with a wholehearted approach. If you need more understanding about that, go back to the podcast episodes that we did where I was interviewing Cora on this whole topic of shame and how we overcome shame through wholeheartedness. Oh man, so good. I could listen to Cora talk about shame and wholeheartedness all day, and I do, because that's what we talk about all day, and we absolutely love it. And she could listen to Brene Brown, talk about shame and wholeheartedness all day long. So just, shout out. Thanks, Brene. Not that she would, well, you never know. She might listen to the podcast. I'd like to think, maybe. Giving credit where it's due there. She's been such an inspiration. Okay, so under Get the Healing Part 2, we are, first point here, reach out for help. Okay? I just want to, straight off the bat, again, if you know me, I am like, if there was a version of Alcoholics Anonymous for people who like can't ask for help Anonymous, or like Independence Anonymous, I would be at every meeting. I Matthew Dawson, here I am, and I am I can't, how would you call that? And I can't ask for help, Beck. Alec. Can't ask for help, Alec. I've got problems. Sorry. Right. So I'm telling you, this is something I've had to learn the hard way. That is for sure. So this is weighty. I'm hoping you're picking up the weight of this. It's weighty for me to communicate this, because it's become such a point of passion, because I've had to work so hard to cultivate this in my life, and still work hard to cultivate this in my life. I described in the previous episode that for me, getting time alone and journaling with Jesus, right? So, you might think that sounds a little kooky, or you might be like, yeah, that's awesome. Either way, hey, that's my story, sticking to it. And that I'm reaching out for help. And quite often, I need, somebody who is actually able to show up in physical human form, love Jesus. He doesn't usually show up in my living room in physical form, and so I need mentors. I need people to reach out to. This is very frequent for me. I realized something yesterday. I'm like, I do not know what to do about this situation. This is really difficult. I'm feeling some frustration in this particular thing I'm working through with the organization that we run, and I've disciplined myself to ask the question, who can I ask for help from? Whose life do I look at and I think, yeah, I want my life to look a little bit more like that. And then I can at least ask, maybe they don't have time for me, but maybe they do, and I'm going to give it a shot. Because I want to grow, because I want to learn, and the worst thing is that they could say no, and hopefully I'm big enough to be able to handle that. So I'm reaching out for help. That's just like, honestly, it might seem a little bit extreme, but for me, it's just an absolute. It's just an absolute. Reaching out to, maybe it's a book. Maybe it's a podcast like this. Maybe it's a course. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's a counselor. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's God. Whatever it is in your life. Straight away, step number one is realizing I'm not going to pull myself out of this situation. I have participated. Like, there's something about the way I conduct my life that has contributed significantly. Maybe other people have done something that have contributed significantly to my pain, but I'm part of it, And believe me, friends, you want to be a part of the problem. Because if you are part of the problem, guess what? That means you can also be part of the solution. You can, if you are part of the problem of this painful relational dynamic you're in, that is good news, because that means you can change something on your half of the relationship that might lead to a more awesome connection with that person. It would be terrible news long term. I know it might be a really comforting thought in the immediate to think the other person is 100% responsible for this dynamic. Believe me, that is not good news for you. Because if that's the case, you are trapped. You are stuck. There's nothing you can do about that, right? But if you are part of the problem, that means you get to exercise some authority, some control over your half of the relationship. Remember, control is a wonderful, wonderful thing as long as you are pointing it at yourself. Be a control freak. Just point all that control freakiness all towards yourself. As long as it's pointed towards yourself, we have a word for that: self-control. And we think of that as being really, really awesome. Amazing how you can be like, the difference between an overbearing, over-controlling ogre and a self-controlled person. The difference is not control. That's the common factor. The difference is where you point it. So use that to reach out for help. And hey, this is what we're doing with Restoring Connections. What we're working on is training relationship mentors, training people who can be agents of healing, wherever they are in all kinds of situations. And so, this is the main thing that we do is not this podcast. This is just something that I really enjoy and we try to do as a resource for this sort of community of people that we're a part of. But the main thing that we do is actually our mentoring program, our personal mentoring program, and our team mentoring program. And so if you got nothing else, if you got nowhere else to turn to, if you've got, avenues for reaching out for help existing, awesome. More power to you. Go for it. If you don't, well, reach out to us. Okay, so that's point number one is reach out for help. Get your action plan going and figure out What is it going to take for me to get back into an emotional state? Obviously, in the previous episode, we identified, there might be some needs that you have. I talked about the fact that to get myself back into a healthy emotional state, time in nature alone is really helpful for me, especially going for a surf. I don't know why it works, right? I don't care why it works. I just care that it works. And I've just discovered that about myself. And so it's funny, but I've discovered that one of the most loving, selfless things I can possibly do for my family is spend a lot of time surfing. Even when I say it, it still sounds silly, but it's actually true, right? To a degree, obviously. I still got to show up here and fulfill my responsibilities. But as much as I can, getting in the water. I went for a surf this morning and I feel awesome. It's probably why I'm in such a great emotional state right now for this podcast. Going for a surf early in the morning, absolutely love it. Very helpful for me, very restorative for me. And there's other things that I find really. I'm getting into poetry. About 6 months ago, maybe 7 months ago, I started writing poetry. I got my iPad, my notes app, and my Apple Pencil, and I thought I'd experiment with it. Actually, it was after reading a particular book that was recommended by a friend of mine on creativity, and something in there kind of struck me, and I don't know, the thought dropped in my mind. What if I'd like take a crack at writing poetry, and turns out I love it. I love it. I write probably 2 or 3 poems a week at the moment, and quite often I find it really healing and helpful for me processing the points of pain, the points of disappointment, points of frustration, and I'm finding that really helpful. All right, I'm telling you about my. You're probably wired completely differently to me. Maybe there's some similarities, but I'm hoping that as you listen to me talk about, myself, sounds funny to put it like that, but that's exactly what I'm doing. As you're listening to me talk about me, I'm hoping that causes you to consider, like, what about you? Like, what do you find healing? What do you find restorative? It's like when I'm here in Aotearoa and I'm like, when I felt for, a lot of my life, or, early on, I just felt like I'm sort of generic white dude, grew up in California and I've got this, cool connection to New Zealand, and I'm just sort of in my cultural identity. I'm like, I don't have a culture. I'm just like generic white dude. And then I had the privilege of being with Maori people in their ancestral lands going back, generations and generations and generations. I mean, I'm down the road here like, get that picture. Like, I'm sitting there at the marae, and there's like a 6-year-old boy chanting his lineage, or what we call a whakapapa, chanting his lineage back like 10, 12, 13, 14 generations in that actual physical land that he's standing on. I mean, talk about knowing who you are. I just thought, that is just unreal. And of course, being in that context, you can't help but wonder. It raises a question like, who am I? This 6-year-old kid knows who he is. Like, who am I? How does, like, what is my family story? Why am I the way I am? Why do I do that thing that I do? Why? And that's really good. Like, learning about yourself is incredibly helpful for your close relationships, because it's very unlikely that the people around you are going to know you better than you know you, right? I mean, they might, like someone like Cora is, actually that's often the case. She's incredibly rare, and really gorgeous and really special. But most of the time, people know what they know about you because you told them, because you made that evident in some way. And so learning about yourself is incredibly helpful for other people to be able to know and trust you. And so go on that journey. And that really leads quite seamlessly into the next point, which is, so number one, reach out for help. Number two is, and there's only 2 points in this, so I'm almost done. Number two is this is really like, this is quite important. Keep pushing until you discover something that was always true. So if you go through something really painful in a relationship, my exhortation to you, my encouragement to you, my challenge to you, turn that into a point of discovering truth. If you do that, what happens is that you start building something in your relationship with that person where you are together discovering what is real on planet Earth. You're discovering what is real about you, what is real about them. And then the painful things that you go through, they turn in, there's almost, Cora and I have this because we have, through our points of pain, the way we've been able to process those things with the help of other people who have led us into wisdom that we didn't have, thank goodness. Thank goodness we had them to lead us. Not thank goodness we didn't have wisdom. Thank goodness we had people who were smarter than us, right? And then there's things that I've gone through with Cora that have been really painful, really, made me feel really disconnected, really frustrated, disrespected. And then it's brought to the surface things that were unhealed in me that really had nothing to do with Cora. And so I've ended up not just having like good fruit and beautiful restoration in my relationship with her, it's also brought about incredible restoration within myself and in my relationships with other people as well. And so now I look at her not just as a person who I love, I also look at her as the person whose my relationship with her has actually produced so much gold in my life. And the admiration for her, the gratitude for her just goes through the roof. And so you want to build that in your relationship, in your relationships with your friends. Here's the thing though, when you go through something painful, all you do is whatever it takes to get back to a point of peace, but you don't learn something, you don't discover something, then you're not growing together. And so you're only ever getting back up into a point of like neutral at best. And I would say it's more like a conveyor belt. The connection is actually diminishing, right? Because you might get back to a point of peace, but it's not really resolved. It's not really healed, right? And we haven't pushed through to the point where we have a common narrative where we can sit together and be able to say, yeah, that's what happened. Yeah, this is what I brought to that. This is how I contributed to that painful situation. And the other person says, yeah, this is how I contributed to it. And we're both able to synchronize that narrative and grow together. So, but of course, you can't be in control of what the other person does, but you can be in control of what you do. And here's my challenge to you is it might take minutes, it might take days, weeks, months, years, whatever. Don't stop, processing that deep point of pain that took place there until you discover something true, right? And so this, I told in the previous episode, I talked about something that we went through a couple weeks ago that was really painful. Something came to the surface that, has always been true about me, but I wasn't really aware of it. And so there was a certain thing that I was experiencing that was damaging connection. And so the realization of it was really extraordinary. Actually, it had to do with, I'll just be honest, I wasn't planning on it, but I'll just tell you, it had to do with my need to feel celebrated in my cultural identity as a white, American, Kiwi, male, Dawson, original with origins back to the UK, Scotland and and England, and really, like I've been, even after this long journey, in having the privilege of being able to journey alongside just extraordinary Maori friends in their in this amazing context, this land, Aotearoa. Even then, it's still taken me a long time to even really be dialed into having a sense of cultural identity. And I realized I need that to really be celebrated. I need that to be for it's always been true, but I just discovered it. And it was amazing. I was able to sit with Cora and say, I think I've had a revelation about your need. I've got a newfound empathy for the pain that you've experienced at times and not feeling celebrated in your cultural identity. And I'd never really been able to empathize with that before because I'd never really been dialed into my own emotions enough to be able to know that pain in my own journey. And so that was amazing, being able to, discover that truth and then go to another level of understanding and empathy and connection and trust. And then ultimately just being able to do a way better job going forward of meeting each other's needs, legitimate needs, and loving each other well. And so that only happens when you keep pushing until you discover something that was always true. Or maybe it doesn't have to be always true. You keep pushing until you discover something that's true. Maybe the thing you discover is that you need boundaries in the relationship that you didn't realize that you needed. Okay, great. Good. You've discovered something. You've learned something. You can mark it. It's like if last year I got food poisoning after eating sushi from a particular sushi shop. Like, there's something very helpful about knowing, I'm like puking my guts out and it's awful. This is actually the first time I've ever had food poisoning. And what's the question? It's like, what am I? How did this happen? Why am I going through this? I need to keep pushing until I get to a point where I've got some clarity as to what took place and how can I conduct myself differently in order to not experience that again. Because I don't know about you, but I don't like experiencing pain. I'm like, the saying, I'm allergic to it. It's like pain is it's a part of life, But if I go through pain, one thing's for sure, I'm working really hard to make sure it doesn't turn into confusion, because confusion you can't be confused and learning at the same time. Like, picture yourself, your most confused moments in high school or in university. Were you learning and confused at the same time? No, you were not. You were doing one or the other. You were either learning or you were confused. You can't do both at the same time. So, pain, you can learn even if you're in pain. You can't learn and grow while you're confused. So you got to be careful not to let the pain turn into confusion. And the best way to do that is you get relentless. You say, I'm not letting go of this thing. This sucked. That was painful. That was damaging, right? And I'm not letting go of this experience. I'm not letting go of this issue that's come to the surface until I get something out of the bank account. Like, I'm not letting go until I turn this thing into some learning. I'm not letting go. I'm not satisfied with I just try to get myself back into a point where I'm kind of peaceful and not furious. That's not enough. I'm pushing through until I discover some truth, because then I go, yeah, now it makes me less afraid the next time I go into something painful. I'm like, no, I know where this heads. I'm in a lot of pain right now, but I know where this heads. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to discover something. And ultimately, it's going to build strength because I'm going to discover something about me, and then it is very likely to lead to a deeper connection with this person. It might lead to a diminished connection temporarily. It might mean I'm discovering I need some boundaries that I didn't realize I needed. And so it might need some distance in the immediate, but the whole point of healthy boundaries ultimately is to actually protect whatever's left of the connection, to keep it from getting more damaged, and to create some space there for trust to hopefully be rebuilt over time. So, it creates the opportunity, for the relationship to be healed and to get even deeper down the track. Okay, friends, I might leave it at that. So that was, what do I do with all this pain? A wholehearted approach. Stop the bleeding, get the healing. Again, sorry about the cheesy rhyme, totally unintentional. I hope you can forgive me. Lots of love, friends. See ya.
We hope you found the conversation and stories on today's podcast helpful and insightful. If you want to go deeper, Restoring Connections offers online courses that cover key topics like personal responsibility, proactive care, powerful communication, and healthy boundaries. Go to www.restoringconnections.nz for more information. This podcast is funded by generous supporters from all over the world. Please consider supporting by going to the Restoring Connections website and hitting the Contribute button. By partnering with us, you're helping to provide mentoring, workshops, and training to others who are also restoring their connections.